In case you thought it wasn't appropriate to continue talking about Arsenal, you're wrong. This is the Arsenal Vision pre-match, post-match podcast. What am I talking about? I've been saying World Cup daily every day. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. I said pre-match. Look, okay, let's go behind the scenes here. We're trying a new recording environment for this episode, something that makes it a little easier to put out on YouTube to see how it goes. And we figured we'd do it now while we're in the World Cup, work out the kinks, kind of like setting up a little bit of a friendly, right? Like Arsenal are doing, except like a friendly podcast where we can work out the kinks on some new technology. And what I didn't realize is not only the music I played on the YouTube side is the old theme music. So if you missed the old theme music, you can go back and listen to it over on YouTube. And it says pre-match show on the video instead of just regular show. So it's all kinds of messed up. But if you're just listening on a regular podcast platform, you won't know any of that, which is a good thing because, we're, like I said, we're working out the kinks. So here's the story. We are going to talk Arsenal today. We're doing the World Cup Daily. There'll still be a World Cup Daily out today, as usual. So, yeah, it's your cup runneth over with podcasts. What that does mean, though, is that this won't be much of a discussion about the World Cup. Now, as a reminder, we did a scouting video for Danilo, who else did we do on that? Oh, Facundo Torres. We've also done one for Murdryk and Jesper Lindstrom. There was even a mystery person scouted. So those are all over on the Patreon side if you want to be there. We got a lot going on. There's pods every day. Hopefully you are enjoying the World Cup to the extent that, that's possible while we're all thinking about Arsenal. But if not, no problem. Arsenal will be back amazingly sooner than it seems. And if you did celebrate the holiday recently in America, happy holiday. Hope it was a good time. And here to talk actual Arsenal stuff with me now is Tim. You can find him on Twitter at Stillmanator. Hello, Tim.
Hello there. You finally got it.
I did finally get it. And with me as well is Paul. You can find him on Twitter at Pause My Pants. Hello, Pause.
Woo!
Woohoo, indeed. So, yeah, just the wrong video, the wrong audio, and me with the wrong intro. Again, it's a friendly. We're not going to bring this kind of energy to the season when it comes back. So nothing to worry about there. But, Tim, I guess let's start just with a little meta discussion. Like, let's go super zoomed out. How are you doing with it being November and there's no Arsenal? How are you doing with this World Cup taking place and there's no Arsenal? Because, like, it feels a million years ago we played Wolves. The intensity and heat and nervousness and excitement of the season we've been building just feels like it's been cauterized. Like it just came to a stop like a freight train. I have no idea how the players and the manager are going to recapture the momentum and psychological edge of where we were if I, random fan, can't even stay connected to it. So how are you from a sort of meta macro standpoint dealing with the absence of Arsenal football at the time of year when usually it would be at a fever pitch?
Yeah, I've got two answers to this question, really, because in one sense, it hasn't stopped for me because the women's season is still rolling.
True, and we will get onto that, by the way.
Yeah, and I'm massively grateful for that because it has given me Arsenal. And actually, October for me was mega intense because the men's team played 9 games, the women's team played 6 games. Whoa. And, being across all of that, that's like 15 games in 31 days. It did feel pretty intense. So I'm actually quite grateful because what's going to happen is the women's season goes on till their last game is the 21st of December and then they don't play again till 15th of January. So I've got this nice period where they actually don't even overlap again until mid-January, so I can concentrate on one at a time. But with regards to the men's side, it feels a bit like, how when you wake up from a dream and like for a couple of seconds you remember it all quite vividly, but the longer the time goes on, the more like the memory of the dream disintegrates and you start going, oh, what was it about? I remember this person was in it, but what were they doing in it? Like the further you get away from the dream, the less you remember. That's kind of what it feels like. And you're right, like Wolves feels like a million years ago. It's a fortnight, just 2 weeks ago. And it feels, and particularly, when you just get dumped straight into like a World Cup like this, and usually with a World Cup, you're used to like a good period of build up and you're used to like a slow transition between the two. And then you kind of just get, right, Premier League, now it's World Cup. And it is just a bit like waking from like some kind of fever dream or anxiety dream or something like that. I kind of welcomed the break a little bit at first because, like I said, there were just so many games in October, but I knew that like that wouldn't be enough to sustain me for 6 weeks. And look, I've already bought my ticket for the Juventus friendly. Put it that way. And my friendly embargo will be very much lifted when
Yeah.
Arsenal play those 2 games in Dubai. I can
That
tell
is
you
going to
that
be
much for
so
sure.
weird. Yeah, I mean, Paul, that's one that I wanted to get onto because, Tim, I think you hit on something really interesting. Right now, I feel like, it almost feels like a train track where the train has been switched from the track that runs your heart and your mind down the Arsenal track to the international football track. But much like the trolley problem, we're going to have to decide what to do when these friendlies go.
How many, is there a none and are there some small children? Because I'm not that conflicted yet.
Yeah, if you don't know the trolley problem, please Google trolley problem or Google the Good Place trolley problem because they did a funny send up of it. But the issue now is that we are going to have some Arsenal football, and we're going to be smacked in the face with the real oddity of a World Cup, the biggest international football that can exist, going on while Arsenal are playing. And I find myself already getting excited to watch a friendly, which tells you where my meter is on which I care about more. That's going to be really interesting, smack in the face of how much club football means when this meaningless friendly comes up. And I think a lot of us are going to be like, all right, yeah, World Cup, I get it, but what's happening in the friendly? So how are you looking forward to these friendlies? And how do you think the club and the manager and the players are going to handle staying engaged at a time of year when you'd normally have no problem being focused, but right now it just seems like an afterthought?
I think it's going to be weird and difficult and funky for everybody. It's uncharted territory. They don't know how it's going to be. I think the clubs that are the most kind of grounded at the moment, who have the least going on politically, you want as many factors pulled out of it. I think Arsenal is quite a simple club right at this moment. Wasn't a year or 2 or 3 or 4 ago. And really, so they only need to, I mean, there's all sorts of things going on behind the scenes, but in terms of the broader picture, what's going on at other clubs, we should have the simpler emotional landscape to come out of this break, get sorted and get going again. We know where we're at, what we're trying to do. I think the end of last year, the way the season played out, the fact that we had something that we felt we kind of let it go, and the cost of letting your focus go. Now, I think there was a hell of a lot more going on than that at the end of last season. I think it was way more about losing key personnel across our back line and in deep midfield. But there was certainly a psychological aspect where when we lost our shit, we totally lost our shit. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't that calm and chill. So they're going to continually, even if it's not directly applicable, they'll all keep pointing back to that. Did we learn our lessons of not being on task, on mission? Like, I think it's going to be a great focusing point, even though the lessons maybe aren't directly applicable. The principle is, if you miss a beat, it can throw you off. And so I think there's a good chance that Arsenal will come back in good shape with a simplified kind of emotional approach to what the season's about. Personally, I found I'm warming up to this World Cup game by game. I'm not actually tuned into I was just thinking yesterday about the friendlies that are coming up. I am kind of switched to the World Cup. I'm not quite switched. That seems really weird right now. That seems too early to me. I'm not ready to turn on those burners while I'm excited about the World Cup. But my world's different to an Arsenal player's world, so they'll be feeling different about
that'll all change the minute it kicks off and you're hunting for an illegal stream and you hear that Emil Smith-Rowe is in the starting lineup now. And you're going to be like, the World Cup, what is that? I don't even know were there games today. You're going to know the XG of Emil Smith-Rowe in a friendly played in Dubai, I believe.
Emil Smith-Rowe is a great one. So I'll probably never write this blog, but I have this blog I want to write called Return of the Wolf, right? Relating to him, relating to the way he was reintroduced into the wild in that game against Chelsea in December that restarted. I don't know if you've seen that video that was on Twitter, YouTube. I think it was about Yellowstone. They'd taken the wolves out, or the wolves had died off, and they had coyotes and deer and this, that, and the other. But the hierarchy wasn't quite right. But they didn't know that. but they thought it'd be cool to put in a couple of wolves. And suddenly they bring in a few wolves. The coyotes piss off because they're terrified of wolves. The deer push back to their normal boundaries. All of the kind of pyramid of the ecology changed. Everything came to life. The whole park, the way the waters flowed, because I don't know what they had, beavers and otters and orangutans. I don't know what there is in Yellowstone, but the whole hierarchy kind of reassembled itself. That complex systems thing, you don't really know how to build a complex system, but if you start yanking out parts, you'll pull it apart. They reintroduced the wolves, and we didn't know in our Yellowstone of Arsenal what we needed at that time, except we reintroduced the wolf, the kinds of players, Saka and Smith Rowe, the kinds of players that attacked through the middle, et cetera, et cetera. So I really think I'm getting pretty excited about the Smith Rowe portion of this. I think he can add something really important to how we play. We have other wolves now, but he was, in some ways, he was the original reintroduced the wolf for me.
And since nobody's listening to this podcast, that's going to be my column for this week. So thanks for that, Paul. You might not have time to write it. I will now.
I don't.
I'm looking forward to reading it, Tim, because I'm not sure I followed it as Paul was explaining it. So I think it'll be interesting to see if it comes together as a podcast. And that is an interesting question, though, Tim, in that we do play West Ham on Boxing Day. Vieira isn't at the World Cup. Emil Smith-Rowe isn't at the World Cup. Eddie Nketiah isn't at the World Cup. I mean, look, we're top of the table, 5 points clear. You can't be cavalier. But might Mikel say, I'm playing Juventus and Milan and Lyon in friendlies. I'm getting these guys sharp and ready and focused on our positional football. And might he be inclined to integrate for that West Ham game, at least, some players who have stayed behind? And Emil Smith-Rowe is one in particular who I'm sure will be chomping at the bit, to Paul's point, to he must be hungry like the wolf, as they say, to get into the lineup.
Go on, sing it. You know you want to. Elliot.
I do want to.
You love to burst out a bit of Duran for no really good reason.
But it's funny you say that, because genuinely I have one of the good things about the break is like writing stuff, because nothing's going to happen. It's like the summer, because nothing's going to happen. You can just like write stuff. So I've got the next 3 weeks sorted. And the thing that's going to come this week is pretty much that point. So I've focused on 3 players: Emil Smith-Rowe, Eddie Nketiah, and Kieran Tierney. I could have put Fabio Vieira in there, but didn't. But the thing is, Arsenal made the fewest starting lineup changes of any team in the Premier League so far. And generally, when teams do that, they're usually top or near the top of the league.
And the number of minutes per sub, that's the other end of it, right? I mean, it's not just we're starting the same 11. We keep the buggers on the pitch.
Yep. And when I wrote about kind of our over-reliance on Saka Martinelli last week, I looked at the substitution patterns of when they come off on the rare occasions that they do. And it's always like, Saka came off in the 92nd minute for holding, or like Martinelli came off in the 70th minute when we were 4-0 up, or something like that. Like, it's never been about changing the game. And actually, we haven't really had to that often, because I think we've only been behind twice in the Premier League this season, against Fulham and then Man United. So we haven't needed to change it. But like, all of that is going to change. All of that is going to change. We are not going to keep... I don't know, we might end up with the fewest starting lineup changes, but it's not going to be to this extent, basically. So those players, they are going to have to make a contribution, particularly if we're balancing Europa League as well. In the second half of the season, which we might well be if we go a few more rounds in that. So we're going to need those players. And, to your point, Elliot, Boxing Day, West Ham, there is a fantastic chance we are not going to have Jesus and Martinelli. Like, Brazil could go to the final, could win it, etc., etc. That's going to be 8 days before the West Ham game. Any of our players get to the final, they're probably not going to play against West Ham. And Brazil are the most likely, I think, the players we've got. England...
At least they probably won't have played, right? They probably won't have played, so they might still be drunk, but they should be fit at least and ready to go.
Yeah. But there's so many other variables to consider, like, and all Premier League clubs are going to have to consider this. Like, what if your players win it? And you remember that interview Per Mertesacker gave in 2014 when he said, I found it difficult for a few months to recalibrate. What if they lose it? Like, at least when Saka missed his penalty last summer, he got to go on holiday the day after. Like, what if Brazil get to the final or something? There's a shootout, Jesus or Martinelli miss the penalty, and then we cut, all stuff that doesn't really bear thinking about. But there could be a big high, there could be a big trauma as well. And how do we deal with that? But regardless of all of that, guys like Nketiah, Smith Rowe, Tierney, like against West Ham, they're probably going to have to play. And like the advantage is they'll get to play, presumably Smith Rowe as well, all three of those friendlies. So they have a chance to really get the rhythm that, Tierney, I don't think it's a rhythm thing. He has been getting a lot of minutes. They're just not the minutes he wants. They're the Europa League minutes. But he's trying to learn a new style of play. He'll have a couple more friendlies to try to do that. Smith Rowe, it's about getting fit again. Nketiah, he's lost that rhythm that he had at the end of last season because he was playing every game and he was playing it with Saka, Ødegaard, and Martinelli rather than like Fabio Vieira, Reece Nelson and guys like that. So it's a chance for them to come back into some rhythm, because at the very least for the West Ham game, we're going to have to rely on them to some extent, even if it's, coming off the bench. And really what's going to have to, for us to sustain any kind of challenge, is we're going to have to move from being a 14-man team, and quite a lot of those extra players are defenders anyway. So, your 12th men are like Tomiyasu, Tierney at the moment. We're going to have to move from that to being more of a 16, 17-man team. That's going to mean Nketiah doing a bit more. That's going to mean Smith Rowe coming back into the fold. That's going to mean Vieira, progressing and developing a little bit. We're going to need those guys one way or another, because we've kind of gotten away so far with maybe some over-reliance on Saka, Martinelli, Jesus, Partey, people like that. And there's an excellent chance we're not going to be able to do that for, so we're not halfway through the season. We're like just over a third. So we'll need those guys, and those friendlies are going to be very big for them.
Even Tomiyasu might be late back from the World Cup based on, did you see the Japanese dressing room after their game?
No, the loss?
No, the win.
Yes, I did see that. And how's that working out now, unfortunately?
I did, yeah. There's a really funny tweet from Andy Ha, who does lots of funny tweets, where he's reversed the film of Japanese fans tidying the stadium up and kind of just said, look at these Japanese fans throwing rubbish all over the floors, disgraceful.
Yeah, I was picturing them celebrating after the win, like throwing things, but thinking, I'm going to have to pick that up later. I won't throw too much water, or I won't throw that too far. Tommy's going to have to pick that up. But basically, I think, Tommy could be late back from the World Cup based on how tidy that dressing room needs to be when they're all done.
So a couple of tweets that if you want to steal them and go ahead and be ready for them. Obviously, when the first lineup comes out for that friendly against Lyon, Arteta out. He hasn't picked Jesus. He hasn't picked Martinelli. Any of those tweets will be good. And then obviously the meltdown after the loss in a friendly, assuming Arsenal ever lose a football match. So that would be another one. I will play pop psychologist just briefly and say, I actually think if Brazil or one of the teams that had prominent Arsenal players in it win the World Cup, that will be the bigger problem for Arsenal than if they don't. I think trying to be like, now I've got to knuckle down and focus on winning the Premier League will just seem almost quaint, having lifted the World Cup for Brazil. Like, you know what I'm saying, Tim, versus if you lose it, I think you will want to find a place to bury yourself to get away from the misery. And the place you would do it, right, would be like, I'm still competing to win the Premier League. I've still got the chance to achieve legend status, to achieve something massive. And you could just like sink yourself right back into club football as a way to like hide from the disappointment of the World Cup. But if you've won it, how do you get refocused? This is so unfair that these players 8 days after the tournament ends, or 12 days, even whatever it is, are going to have to shift gears psychologically, forget physically, just psychologically back to caring about this stuff.
Yeah, I read, excuse me, I read like an interesting tidbit in the Brazilian press this morning about Gabriel Jesus, and like this is how, like, listen, every nation is under pressure in the World Cup and all of that. And we all hear about the things they do, like, do they have the family there or not? And if they win the tournament, whatever they decided was a master stroke. And if they don't, it's the reason they didn't win and blah, blah, blah. But I read this really good bit about Gabriel Jesus, which kind of said his family's not out in Qatar yet because they weren't sure he was going to be picked and they didn't want to jinx it. And obviously the squads are announced so close to the tournament that they didn't have time to arrange flights. So like his family aren't out there yet. But also like Brazil have, because he was so criticized after the last World Cup, Brazil have done this thing where they're keeping him out of the spotlight, because what his issue was last time, he got criticized, and the mistake he made was that he engaged with the criticism. And everything he said was right. Like, because he didn't score a goal, everyone was like, you're useless, you didn't score a goal. And he was like, well, no, but I was doing other things, and my role was, and everyone's like, shut up, we don't care. Yeah. And like he engaged with it, and also like his mum gave interviews and stuff like that, and it just kind of made things a bit worse, as harsh as that sounds. And so I read this thing about how, first of all, Brazil this time have decided not to let the families have that much contact with the players, although that's largely, I think, because of Neymar, because Neymar's dad was like marching in the fucking dressing room last time and all of that. So I think they've just gone, right, Neymar's dad is too much of a problem, so we'll just say no families. But with Gabriel Jesus, they're just like, we're not putting him up for press conferences. We're just like keeping him under wraps a little bit. And of course, it's different for him this time anyway, because last time he was starting and this time he isn't. Richarlison scored twice in the first game, so like he's not going to effectively. But what's interesting, he's still got on the field, obviously. What's really interesting is that Martinelli got on, which I think that's, sorry to steer this to the World Cup, but I think that's really interesting, because he's got the number 26. That's where he was in the squad. And I know you've referenced it on podcasts about like people were talking about how well he trained. That did come out in the Brazilian press a lot. Videos of him spanking shots into the top corner came out a lot, and it obviously made an impression for him to come on.
And he looked really good. I mean, it was hard to shine in that game. The second half was lit from Brazil with kind of attacking star after attacking star, and yet he still really popped. I mean, that was a contribution. You could imagine. And Jesus did his thing, but I get why Brazilian fans don't get him. Like, I thought he was pretty good when he came on, but you wouldn't come away with any highlights in your mind. He just opened it up for other players and got in the right spots and the things Jesus does.
Yeah, and now Neymar's out of the last two group games, so that does open up a spot. That basically, I mean, again, I don't think either of them will fill it per se as a starter, but it takes away like another attacker, moves them up one.
It'll be interesting. So let's shift gears to the Arsenal players at the World Cup. And since Tim has taken over the role of host and moved us on to that topic, which is where I was going to go anyway. So Paul, Tomiyasu did not play, was not on the bench, has been training alone for Japan. I can only assume that this is disciplinary and no, I'm kidding.
He likes a niggle. He likes a niggle.
He does like an injury. And this is one of the things that is unfortunate, but you have to be a little bit more savvy about this stuff as a club. We've seen 2 seasons wrecked by Tierney not being able to stay fit. So we went out and did the smart thing, got a less fit fullback to complement him so that we could play our also not fit right back as the alternative left back. I am not kidding you when I say Tomiyasu, Tierney, and Zinchenko are the left backs for Arsenal, and all of them can't stay fit. It is almost comically Arsenal in its design, but I'm wondering, how worried are you about this? I mean, I guess from the Arsenal of it, you could say, look, if he's going to get a niggle and he's going to have to sit out for a while, it might as well be now. If I don't know if they're going to be able to make a deep run. Obviously, they've lost. I say today, we are recording on a Sunday. This will come out on a Monday, but they've lost today as we record this, and that's going to put things in jeopardy for them. But what's your take on the potential of a Tomiyasu injury, it happening now, and the fact that maybe we are not as vulnerable to it in our current squad composition?
Yeah, I guess I don't feel that way. I feel quite worried about it, Elliot. Something you should be able to.
That's my job. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah. Oh, I got a whole. If we have time, of a whole bit on you and worrying, but maybe that could be that could be a little special section. No, I'm quite worried about the Tommy thing, because if this were Arsenal and there was a risk of a niggle, we wouldn't play him. But this is Japan. This is their World Cup. This is everything. And they brought him on for a half when hadn't been fit beforehand. They brought him on because team unity, giving everything for their country, blah, blah, blah. And that is not necessarily optimum for the player, and tracking where he's at in terms of his fitness. Like, they could crock him. He could crock himself because giving it all for the cause. And that's not what we do. That's not maybe what a club looking at a long season would do. I think we may feel right now that we have coverage across the back line. Somehow, by having Tomiyasu and Zinchenko, the one thing it has done is turned Kieran Tierney into a very fit player for the first 14 games of this season. So we've been a little protected from it.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe that's something in itself. Gives him a run. I'm still a big preseason guy. We're about to have our next little preseason come up here. So I think the friendlies, they have an importance because the players want to see it still clicking and they're still moving forward, even though they're missing half half the muchachos here.
Mm.
And Tomiyasu could well be out before or in the first round of the qualifier.
I'd love to see. I would love to see Arsenal with the audacious call up Japan and ask to have him sent back to the club. Because how sometimes when they're doing friendlies, when it's just friendly games and a player's got a little bit of a niggle, you'll call up the nation and be like, hey, send him back to train with us. I'd love to see a club try that during the World Cup. Just be like, he's a little banged up. Send him back to us and see what Japan says about that.
I definitely think you find that funnier than I do. But
I think I find that funnier than Japan would. That's for sure.
So, we could be getting him back early enough that he could be a significant contributor to the tail end of our friendlies going into the first game within the league. Who knows what, maybe Ben White will go on a run in the World Cup. We could get injuries. I still think Tomiyasu, not that you weren't saying that, but he could be a very, very important player to us.
Oh, yeah.
In the, 24 games to go. So I'm not very sanguine really about the fact that I'll say it a little strongly, that he's been allowing himself to be used and abused at this point for Japan qualification when he's clearly not fit. He didn't even last a half there. He shouldn't have been on there. So, and I think it's a big one. Our back line, keeping our back line fit with lots of options, competing, is not just enough to have the requisite number of players to start a game.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly the case. And what Tomiyasu does by being in the squad, he's not necessarily the guy that you want to start at any position, but he makes everything feel safer if someone has to come off or you have to make a change, right? So you probably want Ben White starting ahead of him, but if Ben White's not there, you feel great about Tomiyasu. Zinchenko and Tierney, we've already discussed the comedy of that situation, but you feel okay if you have Tomiyasu over there. Even at center back, if you have to move Ben White back to center back because there's one out, the less you have to start making decisions am I going to start Holding? Am I going to start Cedric, right? The better you feel. And Tomiyasu is central to being in that situation. Tim, another Arsenal players at the World Cup related moment was the nice moment after the USA-England game where Turner and Ramsdale and Saka are all pictured, and Ben White, of course. And quite hilariously, if you haven't seen the picture, I think Ramsdale has his goalkeeping gloves in his shorts. So
at least we
assume. I mean, who knows?
And he looks pregnant in that photo.
Yeah, we don't body shame here, but it was very funny looking. But that was, I know it's so dumb and it makes me it's fanboying, but I just love that moment. And I think it was Ben White who posted it as reunite or something. And it must have been sort of an interesting dynamic, right? Because you have Ramsdale, who's not starting for England, which I think he should, but that's a different issue. And Turner, who's been brilliant in 2 games for the USA, really coming to the fore in that meetup. So were you as moved by that little picture for reasons I can't explain as I was, or am I just fanboying out?
Yeah, definitely. It is nice when you see that, definitely. Not least because it kind of seems quite genuine, because I think you could quite easily give someone the wide berth if you wanted to. And also and also it came just after I saw because I think certainly on I say the UK pictures, I know the pictures are provided locally, at full time it was Mason Mount and Christian Pulisic, and you're kind of I don't want to see those guys.
Hard pass. Yeah.
But from an Arsenal perspective, what really, really interested me about this game was the performance of Matt Turner. I thought he was great.
Brilliant.
I thought particularly his dominance off his line. Like, I can't remember a single cross he didn't just come out and get. And other than there was one point in the second half where he went for a bit of a wander outside his penalty area with the ball, and I thought,
yeah, but that's what Allison and Ederson do, right? He pulled it off, right? That's the confidence that if there was one thing to me, Tim, that Matt Turner scared the heck out of me when he first arrived at Arsenal was he looked like a deer in headlights. He looked so scared. And Matt Turner we're seeing at the World Cup. At the World Cup is Arsenal through and through, right? Like, get the ball at my feet. I'm going to have a little fun, drop a shoulder, carry the ball. He looks so confident. It's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I just thought, we talked about some of his earlier performances, and I do think people were maybe overly worried. Not so much about the ball at feet thing. I do think that was, he did genuinely look quite uncomfortable, certainly the first game. And that was like, well, can he work on that kind of thing? But his overall goalkeeping, I think has looked really, really well. I say really, like, it's looked okay. He's looked decent to me. But I don't know if it's just like playing in a different type of team like this. And
he made a brilliant save against Wales. I think it was a header, maybe maybe a keeper more header.
Yeah, he nearly got that Bale penalty as well.
Yeah, he did.
So much power behind it. He'd have got there. But it's not like he's been USA's number one for years and years, and he's had no competition. Like, he's had to fight to get in. Like, even before the World Cup, it was just one of those, well, we think Matt Turner's going to be number one, but it's not entirely, because he's had to fight with is it Zach Steffen as well.
Zach Steffen, yeah.
And look, like USA, like that, a lot of goalkeepers who've played in the Premier League, which I think we've discussed before, I assume is kind of down to being multidisciplinary sports that use a lot of hand-eye coordination. But I thought his performance was obviously Ben White and Aaron Ramsdale didn't come on, so other than the gloves in shorts, there was nothing really to pick out from
it's
their
kind of a strange one in a way that he came to Arsenal, because he risked his US position. When you look at it, right, he could be having the Runnersons right now. The club might capriciously be deciding they're going to start Ramsdale once any cup competition gets serious, etc., etc. You would have thought he would plumb for maybe a European club in Germany or lower table Premier League or something like that, where he's really truly competing for the number, and like maybe he's fully competing for the number one shirt at Arsenal. It's just going to take time. Certainly
he's playing in Europe, I mean, because can I stop you for 1 second there, Paul? This is where I think Americans are different from footballers around the world, in that we don't have an international sporting culture to match the international footballing culture around the world. I think if you're a professional athlete in America, you are 98.73% focused on your club career. And in some sports, 100% focused, like NFL, and, 2% at most focused on your international career. No American player is going to be like, well, if I stay at Red Bull New York, and start for Red Bull New York, I'll be the US keeper instead of going to Arsenal and being the backup for 4x the money. And, oh, by the way, I might get to start Europa League games. Like, I just think what you're describing is spot on for most footballers worldwide. I just don't think that athlete culture exists as much in the US. And when you're talking about the difference in money and difference in prestige, and he's not 22, so he's not saying like, I've got all the time in the world to make it to Europe. So, and
it's a great gig and a great platform.
So for me, and, oh, by the way, the difference, because there is such an inferiority complex in the US a little bit about football, going and being the backup for Arsenal might in some ways elevate your stature versus being the starter for the Portland Timbers or something. You know what I mean?
And his competition is backup for Man City.
That exactly. Yep. That's a good point. Really, really good point. Well made. Sorry to cut you off there, Paul, but I do think that culturally there's a distinction there,
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely, I had a big question mark. I don't get it. So that makes sense.
Well, let's do this because I do want to discuss just a couple more performances of the World Cup. Then I want to shift gears to transfer rumors because #clicks. So I think it's really important to say that, this mentality of staying focused in the World Cup and staying focused on Arsenal is going to be an interesting one to track. But to the extent that we are talking about, staying focused, we're talking about mental well-being. And to the extent that we're talking about mental well-being, we should tell you that this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It is the holidays, and the holidays are a time of year when we should be experiencing joy and togetherness and love and all those things. But it is also a time of year where some people don't have that, or they do have that, but they still feel isolation. They still feel challenges. I will mention that yesterday I had to put one of my cats to sleep, and it was heartbreaking. 18 years old, been with me through most of my adult life. And he has a brother that's never been apart from him. So now the brother cat is like wandering around the house, lost and confused. It's hard, right?
I'm sorry, buddy.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Well, yeah, it stinks. And it's almost a year to the day I had to put my dog down. And like, as an adult, you're just supposed to be okay. You just handle it, stuff it down deep inside. You just shake it off, push through it. Why do we tell ourselves to do that? And like, it's not always fair or always possible to lean on your other loved one and say, help me with my challenges. Like, there are people whose job it is to do that. If I was struggling physically, I'd go to a doctor. If I was struggling with physical fitness, I'd go to a trainer. Just use mental support. Use therapy when you need this kind of help. And I'm saying this as much to myself as everybody listening. So, as the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. And if things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month. BetterHelp.com/vision. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/vision. And once you've done that, the only thing left to do, the only thing desperately needed to be done, is the thing that we, I think, also take for granted, which is the state of our privates. I think it is the state of the hair around our privates specifically, and the fact that that should be cleaned up. Look, the winter, especially where I live, is a time where there's no leaves on the trees, there's no grass on your yard or around. And I think that's a perfect time to emulate Mother Nature and get rid of that stuff around your privates. So, what are we talking about with Manscaped? We are talking about the Platinum Package 4.0. And the Platinum Package 4.0 is obviously their best package ever. And it's going to give you the best package ever. Hey, I did that one all by myself. So not only does this include the Lawnmower 4.0, which is the best-in-class shaver. It's wet, dry. It works in the shower. Long battery life. Wireless charging. It has ceramic blades with the skin-safe technology to prevent nicks and cuts. What are you using to shave your privates right now? Probably a razor that's been in your shower for 6 months. Like, come on. It's going to be great. You're going to get the boxer briefs. You're going to get the body buffer. It's a scrubber that makes exfoliating better. Men, women have known this for a long time, I think. You got to exfoliate. You just have to, okay? You have the premium shampoo and conditioner, the ultra premium deodorant. You have the Weed Whacker, which does ears and nose hair. Basically, it's every single thing possible to make your body look and feel and smell fantastic. Get 20% off and free shipping with code ArsenalVision at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use promo code ArsenalVision. Manscaped.com. Get your jingle balls ready for the holiday is what it says here. And that means, Tim, is that enough of that?
Indeed.
Nailed it. All right.
I have to apologize for laughing in the middle of it. I had this flash of a moment when you said, what are you using for trimming your privates? I'm thinking of you up in the wilds of Minnesota with a Bowie knife. I'm like, yikes.
The thing is, that would work if I was that kind of guy. But like, honestly, if you gave me a Bowie knife, I'd be like, I'm going to hurt myself. Take it back. I'm just not, I'm not that way. I am not a lumberjack type guy. So a couple more things here with what's going on at the World Cup with Arsenal players. And I guess, you've got Xhaka, fine. I don't think anything major to report there. Turner, we already discussed, playing really well. Tomiyasu, we discussed, out injured. It's a shame. Tim, I do want to ask you about Martinelli in particular. Jesus obviously played, but Martinelli makes his World Cup debut for Brazil. Can you just expand a little bit on what this will mean for, let's say he doesn't even go on to play again in the World Cup. It's still the realization of a lifelong dream. How much will it mean to him? And to the extent that we can even glean anything from that, and then, of course, refract it through a lens of Arsenaldom, how it might impact him, the Martinelli, the Arsenal player, now being a World Cup capped Brazilian?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is it will certainly be the biggest moment of his career so far in his mind, and I think it would take quite a lot to change that. Maybe winning the Premier League, but I mean, yeah, the World Cup in Brazil is just, it's different. It really, really is. It's it's a country that is quite young, doesn't have a big military history or anything like that. Like, genuinely, the World Cup is a big, big part of its brand as a nation. It's one of the few times, fifth largest country in the world, very rarely talked about, politically or economically as a superpower, feels very much in the shadow of Europe and the US. But when the World Cup rolls around, everyone talks about Brazil, and it's a big, big part of the national psyche and the national pride. And that's why it comes with a lot of pressure as well. But trust me, these guys, they want that more than anything. And but what the knock on, I think, for us is that we can say to Martinelli, particularly because we're trying to get him to sign a contract, you can do that here. We trusted you. We got rid of Aubameyang. We didn't sign anyone. We got rid of him a week before the January transfer window, during the January transfer window.
Yep.
We didn't sign anyone because we trusted you. You've walked into his position. We trusted you to do it. And I think that should mean everything. And at the moment, I think Martinelli's near the top for minutes played this season overall, because
It's right up there, that's for sure. Yep.
Yeah, because we've lacked that other wide player, which we might come on to later in the show. He's had to play a fair amount of Europa League minutes as well. So that's huge. And I think for Martinelli as well, the contrasting emotions actually of all three Brazilians, obviously the other Gabriel not getting in, which will hurt him, obviously, emotionally, that is. Jesus, it would have been a relief because he's been to one before and it didn't go great for him, and it would just be a relief to get to another one. And I think he was always going to go. But for Martinelli, like I said, he's got squad number 26. He squeezed in, to the point that it was reported on the day the squad was announced that he wasn't in.
Yep.
And the competition is so intense. Brazil have taken 9 forwards and Firmino didn't get in. That's the kind of level we're talking about. And there's lots of talk in Brazil about Gabigol as well. Gabriel Barbosa, he didn't get in.
There was some hate for Martinelli as a result of that, right?
Well, yeah, because Flamengo are the most supported team in Brazil, which means they're kind of the most supported team in the world. Something like 20% of Brazilians support Flamengo. And because he plays for Flamengo, there's this whole conspiracy that conspiracies grow up quite quickly around Brazilian footballing culture. And it was seen as he was taking Gabriel Barbosa's place. But Gabriel Barbosa hasn't been in a squad for ages. I don't think he was ever going to go. He's doing a lot, but he's doing it in Brazil. He's not doing it in Europe. And there is a distinction there. But so he scraped in, and that sounds, and to us, that sounds crazy because he's been brilliant this season.
Yep.
But he scraped in. But, when I tell you he got in ahead of Firmino, that probably puts it in a little bit more context for regular Premier League watchers. And so the fact that he scraped in, that he was so close, and I really, really think for him, it would have gone right to the last game, to the last performance. I really think that Chite, when he was, writing down his squad, crossing out names, putting names back in, I'm sure Martinelli
was like the rest of us with our brackets and our fantasy football. He's no, screw it, I'll put him in.
Yeah, exactly. And it might have been a coin toss, and I'm sure that name was scribbled out and put back in a few times. And look, the journalist that reported Martinelli wasn't in the squad isn't a hack. He's well connected. So it could be that on the morning of the announcement that was true, and at the last second he went, no, I'm taking Martinelli. I've got a gut feeling or something that's telling me I've got to take this guy. And then not only that, like I said, I predicted he wouldn't play a minute in this tournament. Well, that prediction has already fallen on its arse. And that tells you that he's impressed in training as well, because Chite loves a lot of his forwards. He loves Anthony. And again, if you watched him at Man United, you'd be like, really? But Anthony plays really, really well for Brazil. Richarlison plays really, really well for Brazil.
Yeah.
His scoring record at the moment for them is crazy. And you look at actually the order of their attackers and you think, okay, obviously Neymar plays, probably obviously Vinicius Junior, but there's probably a lot of people looking at going, is Rafinha one of the four? Like, he's really good, but is he one of the four best? Is Richarlison? And the answer is probably no, but they fit together. That's kind of the point. They really fit together.
Yep.
As an attacking four, and for Martinelli to have forced himself into that conversation and say, you know, you've got 5 attackers on the bench, but I want, and Gabriel Jesus is probably going to come. I want to be the guy that comes off the bench. Like, he must have done a hell. And this is a really short period as well. This is the shortest pre-World Cup period there has basically ever been. And so for him to do enough in like 5 days of training to muscle his way onto the pitch, like we all know that Martinelli is turbocharged, but you know, I reckon he's you know, that cliche about 110%, which is obviously not actually possible, but he might have found 100.1%.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I used to be critical of Granit Xhaka, the one rejoinder that I would get a lot, and it's a fair one, is you may not like him, but every manager he's ever played for thinks he's one of the first names on the team sheet. And there are things you don't see when you watch a football match that managers see, and they see it with Granit Xhaka. Martinelli's in that camp, I feel like, because he went from coming back from a year-long out with injury to, you know, is he going to be in Arteta's plans? This was at a time when we weren't sure if Arteta had his guys he likes and guys he didn't, to being like a must-start first name on the team sheet type guy who plays every single game. And he goes away to a Brazil team he wasn't even sure to make and impresses so much in training he gets minutes when it was said he wouldn't even play, right, Tim? So, I mean, like, this is a guy that whatever he's doing, whether he's a guy who clicks for you as a fan or not, managers see something in this guy that gets him on the pitch.
Definitely. Another thing I've written about for a couple of weeks' time scheduled is about Sambi Lokonga, and one of my doubts over him is, does he really fit like the positional style play that Arteta wants, like where Arteta wants 5 behind the ball and 5 in front of the ball, and to me Sambi looks like he just wants to be on the ball and following it, and kind of Martinelli used to be like that. And so, like, the question around Sambi Lokonga, for example, which I think I kind of already know the answer to, is, does he get invested in like Martinelli did when Arteta was talking about, he needs to add gears to his game and things like that? And we thought maybe he didn't like Martinelli, but it was like, okay, I know this boy's good. Maybe he hasn't quite got the positional discipline to play the exact way I want at the moment, but he's so good, I'm going to coach him to do it. I'm going to put the time in to coach him to do it because I'll get the reward. And he's learned that as well. And the kind of advantage for him is Brazil have very much moved to that style in the last 2 years. They've very, very much gone to, because when Chite first came in, they were like almost like a wingerless team. They were very much more about like box shapes and all of that, but they've moved to this positional, much more Arteta kind of style of play over the last 2 years. And the fact that he's playing at a club level, I'm sure that's another one of the things that Chite has been impressed with in training. It won't just be him busting a gut and spanking the ball in the top corner. I'm sure he's looking at him and thinking, oh wow, he knows this system. He knows like the tactical kind of discipline that I want as well.
And he's going to be 25 at the next World Cup. And there's something to be said for going, you know what? Let me bring this kid. Let me get his feet wet. Let me show him life in the Brazilian national team during a major tournament. Because at 25, he might be the first name on the team sheet type talent. I mean, he has that ceiling. So let's get him warmed up. Paul, over in the England camp. Sorry, Tim, do you have a final thought on that?
Yeah, I was just about to say, actually, that I think that's quite true. It's also worth...
Could Chite be the manager in 4 years' time?
No. Chite is stepping down after the World Cup regardless. That was announced a couple of months ago. Because he's been in the job 6 years, his contract's up, and he already said well ahead of time, and they don't want him to go. He's very, very good, and who knows who they're going to appoint next, because there aren't many good Brazilian coaches out there. But no, so this is Chite is like, if I don't win it now, I'm never going to win it, and he's still banked on Martinelli. However, I still think Elliot makes a good point. Chite is enough of a good guy to think about that kind of stuff as well, I think.
Well, to show you that I'm not going to get picked for Arsenal anytime soon, I think I've just somehow broken my shoulder sitting here podcasting. So just a heads up on that. Paul, over in the England camp, slightly different situation for the Arsenal players. No Ben White yet, no Ramsdale yet. Not a huge surprise. I do think there's been criticism of Trippier's performances, which brings Ben White into the picture, but there's other right backs. There's one, Trent Alexander-Arnold, for example, who certainly will be thought of as an option. But Bukayo Saka continues to be a regular starter for England. Real good in the first game against Iran, obviously with the brace. Loved it for him. Subdued against the USA, but the whole team was subdued. But for reasons that don't necessarily bear discussing, Bukayo Saka winds up being someone that gets challenged for his place in the team. And I think some of that, look, is tribalism between clubs. It's the talent England has in the wide forward positions. And I think it's just natural when there's a Foden on the bench, when there's a Grealish on the bench, right? When there's players like that waiting to come in, that in a subdued 0-0, Bukayo is going to be one of the players that comes in for attention as whether or not he should be getting his starting role. So I'm curious how you think about the Arsenal players in the England camp, and in particular Bukayo Saka, who it wouldn't shock me if Southgate shakes it up just a little bit against Wales, because it's a game they don't need to win. They don't even really need to draw, but he might want to get a look at what a team looks like with a Foden starting in it or something like that. So could you see changes coming, and could you see Saka being one of the ones who maybe sits down for a game and how that might impact him?
Yeah, I could see him playing Saka off the bench just to kind of freshen everything up, get other players to have a look in to I see you're flexing your shoulder there. People don't understand how much of a physical contact sport being on this podcast is.
Just reaching the age in life where sitting is how you get injured. To be fair, that qualifies me to be a left back for Arsenal. But go ahead, please.
Yeah. Look, the one thing Saka has going for him is, maybe it's just my eye or my mind, I don't like the names you listed off. None of them are like, oh yeah, his best position is right wing. Not for me. Not Foden. No, certainly not Grealish. Like what in your mind? What's Mount's best position?
Bench. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I quite like him, but he's not super doing it, and certainly like he can play on the right hand side as kind of a confusing option for the opposition, because he starts out there, but he drifts into midfield. But you're not playing him there to do what Saka does on the right wing, to give that width or to tuck in as an inside forward second option. And like, if I'm Gareth Southgate, A, I'm not super exciting, but B, I like the idea of Saka as my man on that side. I mean, ironically, after the last game, the one thing you would say about Saka is he always is quality on the ball. He always uses the ball well. He keeps it like Southgate still, even when he puts out an attacking lineup, he wants it to be predictively performant. There's a word I just made up. And Saka is that, right? You just know every game almost. He's going to perform. He's going to put in dangerous crosses, cutbacks. I mean, the first 10, 12 minutes where England were actually good, it was in large part because Saka was doing his thing. I just, as the manager of England, I can't see past wanting Saka almost as the first name on the sheet. I know it isn't quite like that. I know he's under a lot of pressure, and it's probably time to play Foden, but I don't see playing Sterling off the right-hand side. I mean, he could, but it's not how he's mostly used, Sterling. So, like, weirdly and strangely, with all of the talent at their command, I think Saka's it's one of the easiest decisions for me as the manager of England to make, which I'm not, but I'm not going to hold that against me. So,
yeah, fair enough. Well, look, if
am
Saka
I wrong in that? Do you think?
No.
Like,
what I was going to say is, like, if Saka can,
who would you play instead of Saka on the right-hand side?
Yes, I mean, he could move Sterling over. I think Foden can play either side.
They're all very compromising, aren't they?
Yeah, you could play Rashford. I guess the irony is, it shows you the confidence in Saka, because there is no natural right winger in the team other than Saka. Mount could move over there. The thing I'll say about Saka is, if you can miss the last penalty for England in the Euros, and come back and be awesome for Arsenal right away. Of all the players who are at the World Cup for Arsenal right now, mentality-wise, he's the one I have the least concern about. And not just miss the last penalty for England in the Euros, step up and be Arsenal's penalty taker in the sharp end of the season last season and make, and score your penalties. Like that kid.
Hopefully he misses a
unflappable.
key penalty for England in this World Cup too that puts them out.
Yeah, because it just seems to make him only.
It's all about the club.
It only makes me stronger, Tim.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, I think also what's in Saka's favour is because, I don't think people want him out of the team per se, but it's like, how do we get Foden in kind of thing? And actually, I think I've kind of, I don't know if I'm getting a little bit dogmatic about this, but I've been developing this theory that actually Phil Foden's more of a finisher, more of the guy. And therefore, I think if you play Phil Foden, it's ahead of Sterling. Don't get me wrong, Foden's brilliant on the ball, can do all the build-up stuff. But the more I've watched him particularly since Haaland has come into the City team, I think Phil Foden's a great finisher. I think he's really good at picking up positions and almost scoring those Sterling-type goals. So I kind of feel like he actually doesn't put pressure on Saka's place, because the thing that Saka does, and again, we're talking about things that coaches value more than fans. The thing Saka's got is just in the build-up. First of all, he's decisive in the penalty area, but he's got that build-up as well. The way he turns players, and just I know we've said it time and again, but the way he can receive the ball back to goal, spin, and get turned, it feels and looks a little bit like quite a moderate value skill that not many people probably value that highly, but it's so big. You think of when you watch football. Yeah, you think of when you watch football, how often you see the winger receive the ball back to goal. Where does it go? Straight back. You do the horseshoe. There aren't many players who can do that. Give it to me. Bang, turned and I've gone. It's such a unique skill that not many players in the world, let alone of his age, actually have, to be able to get turned like that. And it's just one of those things, I think, that coaches go, wow, I really wish that every team I coach in my career has a player that can do that, because it's such a big, important skill set. And it's why I think, and, we were talking about Martinelli a minute ago. Do you remember for the Euros, Saka was very much touch and go. And in fact, at the last minute before the Euros, they changed it from 23 to 26-man squads. And I think a lot of the thinking was that had England been a 23 squad for the Euros, that Saka wouldn't have got in, and that he got in because at the last minute they extended. And look at what he did in that tournament.
Yep.
He forced his way into the team. And I think it's just because, particularly when you've got Sterling and Kane, that your scorers, your finishers or whatever, having that guy that can just quickly turn moderate value possession into, we're in your penalty area now. And even against USA early on, I think
Creates
the US
two chances in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah. I think the US closed that space quite well afterwards, because they thought, oh my God, we're getting exposed down here. But the guy who can just turn, we've got the ball vaguely in midfield to, we're in your area now. That's an enormous skill. And I really don't think it's one that Gareth Southgate will want to give up.
And we know this as Arsenal supporters. The extent to which the wide forward thrives has a lot to do with the fullback. And I think Trippier has been poor. And when you have a fullback who's not playing well, it always impacts the wide forward. I mean, think about last season, how our left wing fell apart when Tierney got injured and we were playing, weird options at left back. It really damaged the extent to which we were able to build play through the left. So I think
they also used him a little differently. When I looked at his positioning, with Arsenal, he stays pretty wide, and he was very much tucked in a lot of the time as kind of a quite close to the center forward. Nothing wrong with that. He's quite capable, but it meant he couldn't do the things that he can reliably do for Arsenal, because you can always get it to Saka on the wing. He can always isolate a player. He can always mince them. Whereas as soon as England sent him a little more infield to open up that corridor on the outside, then it was all about service to him, and he wasn't getting it. When he did get service, he didn't do enough with it. But I think England uses him quite differently, or it did in that game.
Yeah. All right, let's finish off with some transfer rumors, just so that someone will listen to this. with another podcast coming out literally hours from now. So, Paul, there's really two, Mudryk and Danilo. And they both seem to have some fire to the smoke. Let's start with Mudryk because it's probably the more exciting one, even if it's the less important one, so to speak. And I can expand on that. But obviously, if you said right now, what do we need that is absolutely essential to our season not falling apart? You'd say someone that can come in and play the party role if he's not there. But I think Mudryk is the better player, candidly, and we'll get on to that. We've scouted both of these players over on Patreon, by the way. If you want to see the scouting videos, I'd highly recommend it. I think both players have rough edges, but Paul, I was pretty down on Mudryk after the scouting video at the 100 million euro prices being quoted. Now it looks like this is going to be 40, and it wouldn't surprise me if it comes in just south of that. At that price, he is the kind of player, what I saw in the scouting videos, a quick teaser of this is, I saw a player with rough edges, but whose ceiling is as high as it gets because his absolutely extraordinary pace and his understanding once he gets into the box of what to do with the ball are things that very few players have that. The pace alone. I mean, you see with Mbappe, the ability to turn on the jets at that level and get past people terrifies him. I don't know if you saw this highlight, but in the last France game against Denmark, Mbappe just shakes his shoulder a tiny bit like he's going to sprint, and the Denmark player falls down. Literally falls straight to the ground because he's like, I don't know how to run with you. So for me, Mudryk is a player that I don't think you buy him and say, put him right in the starting lineup. He's going to be that guy. And that's why I wasn't sure at 100, but at 40 million with the elite pace and penalty box capabilities he's got, I think he adds some firepower we probably need.
Yeah. Look, I don't know a huge amount about him, mostly what I've seen in our own scouting videos. He looks like the kind of player I would expect us to go for. And I don't think a few million either way is going to be the reason we don't do it. 100 million, well, that, you're creating a whole problem for the club at that point, because there's going to be, there's some pull on wages, agent fees. It just gets a little stupid. That means he's gone somewhere else. But it seems like he's definitely gone somewhere this window. We have the need. We have money. We'll spend a lot of it. We can't fund whatever it is his club needs 100 million for, but we can. That's the 40, 50 million is absolutely what we would and could do. We had a conversation on a previous pod, given that, it is on to make a real title charge, and we're not, even if we're better next year, we may not be in a better position in the league at this point next year. Things have lined up for us, and you go for it. So we have seen the Cronkies spend money big on players to tell us to be excited, and they followed through. I don't think they're going to let this. I really don't think, if there's a good option here, they're going to let this window slip unless the money is stupid. As you said, he's young enough. He's going to be excited enough about being part of this project that he doesn't need to be an automatic starter in his first half of season. I think he could be a big contributor for our overall squad. We clearly need something else in the attacking end, somebody who can have an immediate impact. That one feels like a really good fit. I mean, I'm a bit suspicious with Fabrizio saying, it was 100 million, now it's 40 million. But it could be more, but it could be less, all in the one tweet. It's up and down like the Assyrian Empire, I guess is what I'm saying here. And
of course, I was thinking that too.
Yeah, but little Life of Brian reference there for Tim to keep him engaged while I go off.
Didn't work.
Didn't work. So who knows? But I think that's almost the kind of situation, kind of player I can absolutely see us going for. You can't get a nailed on number one starter to bring into our lineup, because we have two guys that start every game. It has to be somebody who sees himself as potentially a peer with those guys and can really go for it and understands he's got to transition 6 months, but he's going to play some really important games and minutes for us.
The only thing with him, Tim, is he is a stick-on left winger. He is not going to be a number 9 alternative. He's not going to be a right winger. When we did this scouting video, we also scouted Jesper Lindstrom. And I don't think Lindstrom's ceiling is as high, although he seems more polished in the moment. But Lindstrom can play right. He can play left. He could even do a little false 90 type stuff. And when you look at it and you say, we don't love our options behind Saka. We don't love, well, your mileage may vary on how much we love our options behind Jesus. We probably love Emil Smith-Rowe if he can stay fit as an option behind Martinelli. And so you buy a Mudryk, who is a nailed-on left winger, who, I mean, look, can any winger play on the opposite side? Maybe a little bit. It feels less attentive to our needs to have a versatile across the front three player that we rate. But I realize versatile across the front three is nothing in the face of potential superstar on one wing. But so it's not the cleanest fit in terms of squad construction for me, simply because right now, I would say a right winger we like and a number 9 we like probably are slightly more of a priority versus a left winger we like, with Emil Smith-Rowe coming back. And here we are strongly linked to a guy who, in my view, is a stick-on left winger and probably not any of the other two.
Yeah, it's why, like, I guess you could put it on a par with the Tielemans stuff, in terms of Tielemans has never really played left 8 before, but we all talked ourselves into the idea that he could and would. But that I just wonder a little bit about the Mudryk stuff. Like, they're just, on one hand, it's like there's a lot of noise around it, but sometimes when you just think,
a lot of it's generated from his camp side, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look at me, I gotta go. Big money. Yeah,
and it's a lot of it's coming from him. So and like, I'm not criticizing him for that. I think that's fine. Sure. He wants to make the next move in his career, without putting too fine a point on it. He's playing in Ukraine at the moment, and that's problematic as well. So and not criticizing him for that, but there does seem to be a bit of the, I'm a winger, get me out of here type of stuff. And I'm with you, Elliot. I think we definitely need another wide forward. And it doesn't have to be, to Paul's point, it doesn't have to be like, it's not like when we signed Gabriel Jesus and it's like, this number 9 has to be great because he has to play all the time. Like, this is much more about a rotation of 4. This is much more, maybe if we're playing the Champions League final tomorrow and everyone's fit, you don't start, but you probably come on and you probably play the Premier League game before that because we trust you as like you say, like a right-sided Smith-Rowe is basically what we're looking at here. And I too would be slightly dubious about another left winger because, all right, yeah, Martinelli could play on the right, Smith-Rowe could play on the right, but we never see it. And there's got to be a reason that we never see it. It's
the
been
one thing
Reece
I think
Nelson,
on that, Tim, is when we brought on subs, we often kind of switch Martinelli around. It might just be towards the end of the game. And while I agree with you, like Martinelli also talked about playing as striker recently in a way that it was just a quick comment, but he absolutely says, yes, I could play as a striker. Now, I'm not saying that's something we want to do at this delicate point in the season when we're locked and loaded. We got 24 games. It's kind of don't change everything. Keep doing what you're doing until it breaks. But in the broader scheme of things, you could maybe there are the conversations internally about ways to use Martinelli beyond the way he's used this season. Next season we'll have Champions League, and so Mudryk is kind of, does he help us to see out this season with some extra depth, etc.? Do they have ideas how to use Smith-Rowe, Mudryk, Martinelli in slightly different ways, not necessarily as your automatic starter though?
It's a little bit like Richarlison at Spurs, right? It's like you don't start ahead of Kane, you don't start ahead of Son, you probably don't start ahead of Kulusevski, but you can play all 3 of those positions, and any one of those injured or rotated, you're the one that's in. But the thing is, I think we're quite quick to forget that we went big for Rafinha in the summer. You know, which is A, shows you that they really wanted another wide forward, and B, he's very much a right winger. That's what they wanted, and they were prepared to go big. They were prepared to spend big money on that. So it would be quite interesting if the focus has shifted to more of a left-sided player. But it also shows that they were willing to spend budget on that, and that suggests to me that there is budget there. So like the prices around Mudryk, I mean, obviously no one's signing him for 100 million. That's just not happening.
No.
I don't
But
think.
don't
I
they
don't know
both
what the
share
price would be.
the same question in a way? Because when we talked about Rafinha and the huge money, and he's kind of an automatic starter, but he's not going to start ahead of Saka.
But Mudryk wouldn't be an automatic starter. Like that's the reason the Mudryk thing makes a little more sense to me. This is a guy you can buy at 21 years old and say, you're a first man or second man off the bench guy. You can't do that with Rafinha. I think you can do it with Mudryk.
So my point here, though, the point I'm trying to make, though, is that maybe we're looking at it differently to Arteta, which is Arteta wants two guys competing on each wing, like fully balls on competing, because it's good for you and there'll be multiple competitions. So he doesn't have a problem with the fact that it will be Mudryk and Martinelli going at it for the end of the season, stepping in, competing with each other. I know we want a little more Saka coverage. Maybe I don't think he sees Smith Rowe as the same thing over that side. He does a job, but he's not he's a player we want to use, but I don't see him. I know we see him as a left winger. I don't really feel that with him. Mudryk and Martinelli would be good competition. He was fine with Rafinha versus Saka for a full season. I think he just sees it differently. He wants two players going at it on each wing.
Sure. I don't think it's the best sign for Smith Rowe. And that's, look, sure, that's reading way too far into it already. But when Smith Rowe has played under Mikel, he's primarily played instead of, in lieu of Martinelli. That's been that may not be where he sees him long-term, but that's where we've seen him play. So going off that, buying a guy who will expect, if he's coming to Arsenal, he may not expect to start, but he would sure expect to be the guy behind the guy. Then either Smith Rowe's position is changing or Smith Rowe's longevity is in doubt. And look, the one thing you have to say about Smith Rowe, and it's heartbreaking, is there may just be questions about whether his body can ever be dependent on. Because what was the game, Tim? You never forget this stuff. The game where Smith Rowe just arrived onto the ball at the top of the box and passed it into the bottom right corner.
Chelsea away.
I mean, that's a pretty good game to do it, I would say. That was the Chelsea game? Just the
4-2.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry, there aren't many players in the world that can play like that. That can just, arrive on the ball top of the box, open your body, and just pass it that way. Like, he is a sensational footballer. There is no doubt in my mind that Emil Smith Rowe has the talent to be starting at the highest level at a club that wants to be top 4 and maybe beyond. If they have doubts about him, it's only his body. And I have doubts about my body, but that's a different issue. But there's at this point, you'd be hard pressed to argue with that because he has not been able to stay fit at any point for a very long time now. So he's got an important period coming up. Tim, yeah.
I had nothing else to add on.
So let's finish on this.
I have one thing to add on Smith Rowe. The one thing he has to add to his game is kind of a bit of la pausa, the ability to stay on the ball for a minute, to pull players toward. It can't always be the quick give and go, because otherwise he's got to play wide, and he needs to be able to play in those 8-10 spots too.
We've put that on him a bit, haven't we? But what if it turns out he's a forward? You know what I mean? Like, what if he isn't an 8 or a 10? What if it turns out he's a guy who can really finish? I mean, we know one of the things that made him look so good last season is he ran super hot on XG, right? Like, he finished everything. But what if that is his superpower, is that he's just phenomenal around the box, So
like as a left-sided, a left narrow forward?
Maybe.
Yeah, I guess I see that as it could be what they have in mind. It feels like projection from where he is at the moment. To me, the way he finishes is more like your Aaron Ramsey arriving in the box. That's
fair. I think that's
a very attacking 8-10, more kind of bringing the 10 part of it, bringing the attacker part of it.
Is his passing good enough to be an 8-10 though? Because that's the part of his game that has to.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. He needs to develop more kind of a cultured game, faster, slower, kind of see the pitch a little bit more. What he really sees is his opportunity for a 1-2 and he's off to speed up the play. He's a great accelerator of play, but you don't need that for 90 minutes every game. Sometimes you need to create your rondos to pull them across so that you can switch it to the other side. Martinelli does that really well. Saka does that really well. And so now he hasn't had that much time between injuries to develop that side of it, but that's what he's got to do. Like, I love what he does, the 1-2s, the zipping it, the accelerating our game, but you got to slow it down, play it around at times. And he needs a bit more of that La Pausa, the pulling them out of shape, pulling them towards him, have the ball stick to him a little longer than he has traditionally done, a little more chill.
All right, last thing here, Tim. Danilo, we scouted him as well. Physically, he looks the part. He can carry the ball. He can play the first time ball over the top or spray it out to the wing. He can do a lot of that. Boy, does he like to turn into trouble and give the ball away. Boy, does he like to carry the ball in a way where it's easy to take it off him. He does not have ball security. He is not careful in possession. He's a little bit reckless. He likes to take on players when there's no move there to be taken on. He turns into trouble. I did read some stuff that his head's been turned. He's ready to move on from Palmeiras, and he's having a bad season. He's had some red card issues. Is it just the case that this is a player who's too talented to be playing where he is and maybe has lost some of his focus on the game? Because I have to admit the scouting video worried me in terms of very, very raw player who has the tools to maybe come in and someday be the party guy, but you need a player between party and him for me to feel safe. Like a 25-year-old. He didn't look like a guy that'd say, buy him now, and if party's out, boom, there's your guy. So am I misreading that? What's your take on Danilo in terms of his readiness to be the guy if he needs to be the guy?
Yeah, I think it'd be too early for that. I actually think I think Sambi Lokonga's going to go.
I
think it would be more likely as a bit of because you've got to remember El Neni's contract is only 1 year, right? So that, and they only extended it by 1 year. So that kind of says that Arsenal made the decision 1 more year. And that this is like a tide over operation.
I wonder if he might go on loan to Vincent Kompany.
Yeah, could be.
That's not a club. That's a person.
Burnley. But that's kind of, I think it would be more likely in the kind of El Neni replay, because the thing is, it's going to be the whole party piece, as it were. That's really interesting because I'm not really sure you can get a young player to do that, both because you have to be so physically dominant, but because I think the position just requires so much nous, and Partey couldn't do it for a little while. He's had to warm up to it as well. El Neni is an experienced guy. He doesn't play it like Partey does at all. So it's a big piece. And the thing is that, there are midfield slots coming up because, Xhaka's 30 now as well. So, I think, so basically, Partey and Xhaka are in their 30s, which doesn't mean they're, ready for the Naka yard just yet, but you've got to think about it. I think Sambi Lokonga's going to go. So basically, I think there are some midfield spots there. I don't think Danilo would be I suppose what you could say is if Partey's got a couple of years left, you can kind of try and model Danilo in the background. I'm not sure about that, though, because that's what we've been trying to do with Sambi. And if you're trying to get someone to learn a position like that, the only way they learn it is by playing games. Mm-hmm. And that you just get that whole dichotomy. Like Sambi Lokonga has gone from, one of the issues I think for Sambi is that he was playing all the time for Anderlecht, and all of a sudden it's like the harness has been slipped on him. He was the captain, and now it's like he didn't even make the bench for the Wolves game. Mm-hmm. That's a psychological adjustment and everything like that. And it would be the same for Danilo. He's been in the Palmeiras team for a couple of years, and so I just have my doubts that Arsenal would even think that he's the Partey replacement. I think he'd much more likely be like the El Neni / Sambi Lokonga replacement. And I think the Partey one is probably going to it's going to have to be someone a little bit older and probably someone a little bit more spenny, as the kids might say.
Yeah, and I'll just say this about your point about needing to play. He wouldn't be coming into an Arsenal where you say, well, next season we'll give him the Europa League. And that changes the dynamic too. Let's leave it there, guys. We've been going a while, and as I said, this is going to be tough to get anybody to listen to. And I think it was a great conversation, so I feel like people will be missing out. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. Check out those scouting videos, or don't. Just stick around here. We'll have the World Cup daily today and every day, because it right there in the title, this is World Cup, and the third word is daily, so it comes out daily. Tim's on Twitter, @Stillberto. Thank you, Tim.
Stillmanator.
I did it at the start. Tim's on Twitter, @Stillmanator. Man, I did it at the start, but I've already got my mind on other stuff. Sorry. Stillmanator. Tim's on Twitter, @Stillmanator. But see, the good thing by doing this, Tim, is we actually draw more attention to it.
Exactly. You know, it's branding. Exactly.
Exactly.
My pleasure as always.
Yeah. Paul's on Twitter. Pause my pants. Thanks, Pause.
You're welcome. I've actually had a change in my name to him. Not the fundamental thing. The bit on the front, I've matured a little bit over the last week or so, and I've changed it from PIMP to Pause.
To Pause.
Okay. Yeah, to reflect a little more maturing in my presence on social media.
I hadn't noticed it elsewhere, but I think it's a good start. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. We love you, and we will talk to you after your country 10, other country no.